This is a big question, and I think we haven't even started to scratch the surface of what evolutionary science, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary science, we haven't even started to scratch the surface of what it can do.
I'm Adam Hunt, and this is the Evolving Psychiatry podcast, rethinking mental health through an evolutionary lens. Share it with the people who matter, like it if you like it, subscribe if you want to hear more. Alessandra Cassar is a professor of economics at the University of San Francisco. Through laboratory and field experiments across the world, her studies focus on the contributions of evolutionary processes to shaping human behavior. Her current research concentrates on the understudied areas of female competitiveness, the consequences of conflict and disaster victimization for altruism, trust, religiosity, risk and time preferences, and the role of social networks for economic outcomes. Professor Cassar also recently published a paper in Evolution in Human Behavior entitled Maternal Depression as Catalyst for Cooperation, Evidence from Uganda, which is what we're going to mainly talk about today, because it's very relevant to the recent episode of the podcast featuring Ed Hagen talking about depression and his work on depression that's been going on over decades. Professor Cassar has conducted research looking directly at this hypothesis amongst some others, which is super interesting, and I really enjoyed the paper. Alessandra, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Adam, for inviting me.
So yeah, your background is mostly economics, but a lot of your work is on evolutionary perspectives. I'd just be really interested to hear how you got into evolutionary perspectives and also then came into the mental health side specifically.
Yeah. So I am an economist. I was trained as an economist as an undergraduate. I have a master in economics, in international economics, a PhD in international economics and finance. How do you go from there to here? Well, because in econ, there has been, and it is still prevalent, the idea that women don't make it to the top. They don't become CEO at 50% in S&P 500 companies. They don't become president of a country in the same percentage as men. So this is squarely an economic question. Why women don't have the same level of political power, of economic power that men has, despite being able now allowed to vote for over a century in the United States and in many other countries in the world. So this is clearly an economic question. And the answer that economists would give you, especially experimental economists, which is my subfield of economics, is that, women are not as competitive as men. And there are tons of experiments in economics, all based on a specific experiment. And if you want, we can talk about the detail of these experiments that indeed show if we can measure competitiveness, like if we had a thermometers that measure temperature, experimental economists have a game that measure, like a thermometers, the level of individual competitiveness. You really see that men prefer to compete. When men are put in competitive situation, they really improve their performance. Even the same men in a non-competitive versus a competitive situation, they outdo themselves. And if they can choose, they really prefer to compete much more than women. And this is like data. We have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of experiments on this, and it is kind of the framework. It's kind of the paradigm. And yet, as I was, reading the data, because I was not working on female competitive, I was working on social network, I was working on disaster, the effect of disaster, and all of these other things. I was thinking, wow, but I have so many girlfriends. See, I have lots of girlfriends, and these women are competitive. Don't tell me that they are dropping off the labor market, they are not getting their promotion because they don't put themselves out there, because they don't apply, because they are not competitive, because they are not confident. So, and this one was really stewing on me. This kind of feeling was like, I don't know, it doesn't just, when something, even if you read tons of literature, it just didn't seem right to me. And sure enough, I don't even remember how it happened, but I stumbled upon a book by Sarah Hardy, by a primatologist, Sarah Hardy, and it was The Woman That Never Evolved. And I said, oh, what is this? And she was telling the exact same things about the realization that she had when she was a graduate student and a postdoc working with langur monkey, the kind of paradigms that there was that male were very competitive and the female were not, and about mother instinct and all of that. I said, wow, but this is in a way the same kind of perspective we have in economics. I wonder if by including in the games, including in the experiment, what matters to women is going to change in the experiment this measure of competitiveness. Because we are measuring competitiveness, and this experiment don't lie. I mean, these are data. I don't say that these experiments are wrong. But this experiment measure competitiveness in the way it is expressed in males. Female may express competitiveness in a different way. And why is it so? And that is the beginning of me starting to look into evolutionary psychology, starting with lots of work by Sarah Hardy, not just The Woman That Never Evolves, but also Mother Nature, and from them getting a ton of ideas on how we can modify experiment to start to include what matters to women and for what reason. And one experiment after the other, I started to uncover what I think is a different world of female strategies that if you don't allow to be observed, you're never going to see them. Like if you are a biologist, an ornithologist, and you go in the forest, you're a PhD student, and your job is to count how many colors are in the feathers of a bird. Then you're going to see male, 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 male. But what if your job is to start counting the eggs? Then you're going to finally see what females do and how they do it. So that has been the beginning, and from there, my passion to really try to see in economics, are we having a model of homo economicus that it's really good to measure, to register how males do things and for good reason. And every time we measure women with the same metrics, women will always come up short, will always come up smaller, will always come up. But what if we measure women in their own metrics, with their own metrics, with the way they do things?
Interesting. And do you remember when you first came across Ed Hagen's hypothesis and the depression stuff and and what made you get into or start investigating this sort of postnatal, perinatal bargaining strategy work that he works on and that you ended up testing?
Yes. So I already did a series of experiments. So the core idea is that we are a cooperative, the core hypothesis, well, that is a fact, we are a cooperative breeding species. Human, female, women, mother, would not be able to bring children to maturity if we didn't have the amount of support, not just from the baby's father, but also from others in the community. We know also for the demographic transition, we know for the level, for the way in which humans really were able to survive, to try to colonize the world. It was only because of incredible support in terms of provisioning, in terms of protecting, in terms of teaching, in terms of caring, and the many different ways in which mothers receive help from others. And in fact, in the initial experiments that I did on competitiveness, by adding, by especially using the motherhood frame, you're not competing for self, but for your kids. In the next game, you're paid the same amount of money, but you're competing for your kids. Boom! We observed women competing exactly at the same level of men. And I did this with my colleague Jane Zhang, and we replicated in many countries around the world. The only country in which we didn't have it and we had women competing more than men was in Togo, among the Nana bands, which is a fierce ethnic group. It is not an ethnic group, it's a fierce group of women that are the women trader of Western Africa. They are famous throughout Africa because they are the one trading those beautiful, colorful textile. And for them, they have lots of pride in being smart, in being good business women, in always coming out ahead. There isn't any backlash in the society. Nobody would think, oh, because she's an Annabelle, she's also not cooperative. There is no backlash there. So this was the first set of experiment. The second set of experiment involved, and this one was with Mary Rigdon, was involved putting in the final goal for a competition, how much you earn, the possibility to share with the loser. You don't have to, but you could. Men's desire to compete was exactly at the same level. Women desires to compete the moment there is an option. It was exactly at the same level as men. So you tweak a little bit the game and you see that women desires to compete reach the same level as men. And then realizing that, but they are not more cooperative exposed. They are not that they are more generous. And the realization that it is really the appearance that matters a lot, not in a conscious way. I'm sure that this is all unconscious. And this is probably due to the fact that women had to come up with strategies, with adaptation, what we would say in evolutionary psychology, to continue to engender this help from others. One way to engender this help is not to be the one that wants to take it all, the winners take all and leaves nothing from the other. Something that for male brings everything, because success brings women, brings resources, brings mate, because everybody wants to be friend with the captain of the football team, because all the girls are gonna be, around that cloud. While for women is the opposite. Why the captain of the cheerleader? Instead, it is shunned and it's criticized a lot because she wants to be the tallest puppy. In every culture, in China, they say the tallest, referring to women, the tallest puppy get cut. So the idea that maintaining the possibility to cooperate, maintaining this idea that you're not hyper competitive. So women are competitive, but they have to suppress it in order to attract male and transform natural competitors, which are the other female, into allies. So within this framework of cooperative breeding, and women playing a profoundly different game than men, women have to do it, and they have to compete, they have to get resources. They have to compete, but not over the quantity of offspring, but over the quality, the thriving, the success, the bringing to maturity, the fewer one that we can have, because male can have, a lot more than women. And from there thinking, so what are the various strategies that could help women? So we already kind of started, this is the beginning, and I don't know, we need a lot of replication. I don't know if my data replicates, if my experiments replicate. I would love for more people to try to do it their own way, to see how strong it is. But the idea is that women evolve these strategies to help a smaller group of people cooperate with them. We have already seen that the decrease in the inequality, giving the possibility to frame it as a competition, no, it's not for me, but for my children, it's not for me, but for my team. I can share what I win with others. So what about perinatal depression? And that is where I stumble upon the work of Ed Egan, and I say, wow, what an incredible strategy. If in economic, we would call it strategy, but then when I try to tell it to economists, they say, this is so offensive. This is so offensive to women, as if women are there conniving and thinking about how to extract things from men, which if you talk to a biologist, they say, it's normal. There are conflicts. It's not that the interest of one sex is perfectly aligned with the interest of the other sex. Well, the opposite. So if for biologists is more accepted, for economists not much. So instead of calling it an adaptation, because I really wanted to present this idea to economists, because economics is my field, I called it a catalyst. And even then it was not Shall we say, it was not embraced.
Ed went into
But
this
it's
for the
great because then when I read more and more and more, it seemed like it was such a cool hypothesis. At least let's try to test it. We test it, these are the data. And one thing that in economics, they really put it in our head, hammer it in our head, is the concept of causality. And how do we find what causes what when with happenstance data, with data that already exist, the causality goes both ways. For example, you can have that lack of social support. Again, social support help from others, I think being really the most important things that matters to it. It matters to men as well, of course, but especially matters to women. The lack of social support, we know, is a risk factor for depression. But one might also argue that when a person is depressed, because the person is depressed, is not going to seek out people. Maybe other people are going to shun them, are going to avoid them. People might not want to stay around depressed people. So there is this double negative going on. How do you test whether depression in this double negative relationship does at least a little bit, helps a little bit with the support? And this is where the economist in me said, what about trying to use a method that it is very common when we want to measure whether, for example, social support, economic support, let's say you're doing development, and you want to measure whether your program that tries to reduce poverty really does reduce poverty. And you measure income to measure poverty. You cannot just compare people that get the let's call it subsidy, universal basic income. Let's make it a universal basic income. You cannot measure people that get the subsidy from people that did not, because people that get the subsidy are poor to start with. Maybe they have certain traits, certain behavior. They live in certain places that are maybe more distant from places where there are jobs. There are so many things. So one idea is if we can measure people on an index, and there is going to be a cutout. From here on, you get the subsidy, and from here below, you don't get the subsidy. And you can assume that being just above the cutout or just below the cutout is pretty much random. You have almost an experiment. And now you can really measure the people just above the cutout to people just below the cutout. Even simpler, how do we know that a planned economy is not as good to create growth than capitalism or a market economy? Take Berlin, the city of Berlin. A wall was put in the middle, same people, same culture, same everything. It was really random who was on the east side, who was on the west side. Then you let the experiment unfold for a few decades, and then you measure the income. You don't measure the income of all the Eastern Bloc and all the Western Bloc, because one could say, well, one is poorer because they have a different religion or a different institution, or these people, East and West Berlin, were exactly the same, with the same institution, same language, same everything. So measuring things at the border of a cutout seemed to be a very promising way to try to assess causality when you cannot do an experiment. Because how can you do it? Ideally, to test the bargaining hypothesis, you would have to do an experiment and say, I'm going to inject you with the perinatal depression drug. I'm going to inject you with the antidote to it, and let's measure the kind of help you have. But we cannot do experiment on this kind of this kind of mental health symptom. We cannot.
So you had this. You realized there was a possibility to run this experiment in Uganda,
Yeah.
which is excellent because it's outside the Western context, which is already strange. And I guess they already have, I guess they have somewhat more social support and they have more of a community around them. Or it's, yeah, I mean, there must be so many differences between how a mother is doing and the support she can expect in Uganda versus here. But you took it to the kind of a context which is closer to our evolutionary past somehow, maybe to some extent,
And
and you tested.
especially, and especially a context where there is lots of poverty. So the reason why we picked such a situation is because one could say, well, social support really matters in a situation of extreme scarcity and adversity. Maybe it doesn't matter that much to the woman CEO in the United States that can hire an army of nannies, an army of help, which I still doubt. But let's start someplace. Let's start closer with an environment that it is closer to the one that the hypothesis would say. So let's start with an environment of scarcity, difficulty, hardship, material hardship, real hardship, where people don't know where the next meal is going to come next. There was lots of food scarcity within our sample.
Right. So yes, much more of a complex and traumatic and poverty stricken place than here. And you looked for, or the West in general. So you looked for postnatal depression scores, basically, and you correlated them with the reports of a person receiving support from the people around them. I think I'm right in thinking that, right? And you asked questions about whether the mother was having people help watch her children, take care of her baby in case of sickness, kind of give guidance about taking care of the baby, talking with the mother, and also whether people around her would give money to help her. And you found some really interesting results. Maybe you want to just go a little bit into the study and yeah, what you found and yes, and yeah, maybe what was surprising or interesting to you.
Okay, so it went in several steps. First, we used the maternal social support scale by Webster, which is just 5 simple questions that ask whether you feel loved by your husband, whether there is conflict with your husband, whether you have a family that supports you, friends, and then you make an index. We asked in the survey question about food scarcity, whether they were married or not, whether they are a boyfriend cohabitating or not, because the first thing we wanted to know is whether in our sample population we could replicate what is now a well-established fact in the psychology literature, which is lack of social support puts you at risk of depression. And for depression, we use the Edinburgh scale, which can be used both for the postnatal period and prenatal period. We found women that we included in our sample 4 months before giving birth, 4 months after giving birth. We had the entire period. We have this window. And the first part was really to replicate the rest of the literature. And we did find that lower social support, according to the scale, increased significantly the risk of being above the cutoff of the Edinburgh scale. Let's call it depression, above the cutoff of the Edinburgh scale. So this was step number 1. And then we used an instrument. We developed an instrument modifying something that economists use when they are measuring network and social support. And this instrument includes asking questions if specific people, and this is where we modified it, because we asked it for each single person that they could potentially have in their network and that could help. So we ask whether if they have a spouse or boyfriend, with respect to the spouse or boyfriend, their mother, their father, sibling, cousin, If they have it, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the sibling-in-law, I don't know how it's called in English, the sibling-in-law, the neighbors and the friends, we ask them, if you had trouble and you needed something to watch over your baby, or if they were pregnant, if they had already an existing baby, because often these women were pregnant, but they already had, we included the one that already had babies, would this person help you? And or would they help you? Did it help them in the past? And they could answer between never, rarely, sometime, most of the time, and always. So we have this kind of rough scale of the help. What's important is the perceived help, because when you read the literature, what seems to matter is how the women themselves perceive the help that they have. So we ask this kind of instrumental help, watching over the children. Other instrumental help is taking care of them if they are sick, if they have problems. The informational support, do they get good advice? Do they guide you? Emotional support, which we ask about talking. If you have problem, would this person talk to you? Does this person talk to you? How often does this person talk to you? And then the economic one, which is money. If you are in need of a certain sum of money, would you ask this person? Let's immediately talk about money. These people were so poor, exactly because it was intended in the study to include only these very poor people. None of these people would give much money. So when it comes to economic support, we didn't find much result because people simply have no money. They have no cash. They support themselves through working in their vegetable garden, little trade and stuff like that. So now we have this new instrument that measures social support and help, care, what. And then we use this trick. You may remember the West Berlin, East Berlin. Let's put the women, let's rank them around the scale of the Edinburgh scale. Let's take the cutout for Uganda. We also measure the cutout 1 point below, 1 point above. And what did we see? That indeed there was always this negative relationship between social support and depression. So we saw that those that had less social support, they really had more depression. But at the cutout, and this is what the regression discontinuity design does, is nothing else that in a simple linear regression, you put a structural break. You measure whether at one particular point there is a significant gap between here and here. And what did we find? Super strong gap, especially when it came to the woman's spouse or boyfriend, partner, especially when it came to the woman's father, so the baby's grandfather. At the cutout of depression, the women responded, the ones right slight above, they admitted that they were receiving more help than the women slight below. And this is important because it's probably a downward bias. Because when someone is depressed, it's possible that you see things in a less optimistic way. Maybe you don't even realize the help you have around. And even then, those that were depressed right above the cutout admitted to receiving more help, the one below. We can take as a suggestion, I don't want to make too much of it, but it is really a suggestion that when people start realizing that you are depressed, there are all these signs, some people around your network do help more. And this seemed to be really in line with Hagen's hypothesis of the bargaining model, because not everyone does it. We didn't find that neighbor, it's a strong relationship, friends was a strong relationship, there was no this structural break, East Berlin, West Berlin. But those that were closest to the woman, especially the spouse and the grandfather, they really did. And And what was interesting is that, so two things I think are interesting. It seems to be working more on male than on women. So it was more the spouse, almost like a co-evolution of a trait, co-evolution within the pair bonded couple. I don't know if that is, I don't want to, I don't want to claim that I am an evolutionary psychologist, but this was such a strong result that it was really among the male line. The second point, when we submitted the paper, and we got really, really good reviewers that they were really probing at everything, every single detail, check this, check that. I felt it like a collaborative enterprise. This criticism, it was like 26 pages. It was really, really tough. No, because, but understandingly so, if if you claim causality or suggest causality, you better be sure, you better have checked all the T's and dotted all the I's. And one of the reviewers said, well, if this is really the hypothesis, it should be especially when there is conflict. In conflict situation, the bargaining hypothesis, one of the assumptions of the bargaining hypothesis is that perinatal depression could be such an instrument to elicit help when there are conflicts, so that you are truthfully revealing, because it brings a cost to yourself, you truthfully revealing that you need help. So I thought, well, from the other scale of support, because I cannot use the same scale of support as an input and as an output, I have to use different scale. I have precisely this question: is there conflict with your partner? So I was able to divide the sample between those that are in conflict with the partner and those that are not. I redid the same analysis by checking if there is this jump, and sure enough, this jump was only present in the subgroup, in the subsample that had conflict with the partner.
Okay, interesting.
So those that are conflict with the partner had more depression, but at the cutout, they claimed, they felt that they were receiving more help.
Okay, right. So, and if we dug into the details of the people who were much higher in the depression scores, we'd find that the partner was just ignoring them and they're getting more depressed, or they're not receiving the support. But at some point, the partner in the case where they're responding is kind of keeping the depression at bay. Like they're seeing, oh, you're not as active, you're not as happy, and they work extra hard. So they may be just nicer partners or less selfish or whatever. Okay, interesting.
And this is a country that, speaking with anthropologists, is not uncommon in this country that when women are severely depressed, the husband left is one of those legitimate reasons. She's sick, and they leave or they take on another wife. Yeah. This is a country where there isn't only monogamy, there is also polygyny. And this was another test, because I had in my sample, in my sample I couldn't do. This is the idea that one could test. What is another sample in which there are more conflict according to the literature? Women married polygynously. And sure enough, few papers that measure depression and link it to polygyny, there is very little evidence. We couldn't make large claims, but it seems like women in polygyny, a place where there is more need to get the resources, which monetarily, if it is the Sultan of Brunei, maybe there is there is plenty for everyone. But the time resources, the emotional investment, the investment in the bed, a man has 24 hours a day like anybody else. So there is conflict when it comes to attracting the time, the scarce time resources of a man. It looks like there is more perinatal depression. There is more maternal depression. There's more depression in general when women are married polygynously. But these are correlations. It's very difficult to do and make causation statement, monogamy and polygyny. But there are ways in which we can...
Yeah, I'm just wondering if so in this Ugandan sample, they're not hunter-gatherers, right? They are still kind of living in a situation where maybe the husband can escape more easily. I'm remembering anecdotes from my anthropologist friends about women developing sort of depression around the lack of childcare, and the community coming together and really hunting down the husband who's run off somewhere. Because everyone kind of knows, oh, the reason that you can't get out of bed and you're not caring for your children is, even though it's expressed as kind of a sickness behavior and it's not, no one thinks it's bargaining or conscious, but people realize, okay, the husband needs to be here. And they kind of got together and hunted him down in the sort of somewhere else in the jungle, and brought him back, and it resolved. So I'm wondering if, in an even more communal hunter-gatherer context, maybe just more people would be there to catch you at that early stage, but maybe even in this Ugandan setting, which is closer to, but definitely not as ancestral. Really interesting.
No, but I'm sure that this is a kind of environment where family matters a lot, where the in-laws matter a lot, where you have all sorts of definition for people that are not part of your biological family, but to bring them into your biological group, like we would have, calling an uncle a friend of the family. Is not really an uncle, but it's a way to increase. So I am sure that in that context, the group helps a little bit. I'm sure that it helps, but probably not at the level of a hunter-gatherer. It would be interesting to go and replicate the same study. It would be so interesting. And a different level of economic institute, those that are hunter-gatherer, pastoralist, agriculture, you can really do it. I did replicate a little bit. Now when I start a new project as an economist in development, I work with lots of master students that come at my university at USF, and they spend the summer between the first and the second year. They learn how to run this experiment in the field. They learn how to run survey, that is the master in development. So now every time I'm doing a new field, even on a topic that absolutely has no contact with perinatal depression, I always snack in the Edinburgh Depression Scale and the social support scale, because I'm really dying of curiosity to see, was this specific to this group of women in Uganda, or is there something more universal, more general? And it would be great if students or other faculty were able to say, well, let's try it in Chicago in a certain neighborhood. Let's try in San Francisco in the Tenderloin, but also in a place that it is flush with resources and riches. And let's see, money versus human support. We can do so much. We can do so much to really disentangle this hypothesis. Another neat things that emerged since we're talking about the paper, during the referee process that I really enjoyed, one of the referee said, well, but isn't it true that people help when they see sign of distress? Someone break a leg. People help, but that doesn't mean that breaking a leg is an adaptation to receive help from others.
Right. Yeah, sure.
It's a really good point. What is the difference between an adaptation that is there to help women receive help, and just because you are sick? And in the data, in the data set, we had data on if the women had experienced recently. We had malaria, tuberculosis, we had all sorts of diseases. And again, we divided among the people that had those diseases to see if they also, now it was the disease, our kind of Berlin Wall, having the disease versus not. And that didn't make any difference. It didn't make whatsoever no difference. So people get help when they have tuberculosis. People get helped whether they have depression or not. So that was another indication that no, there is something different in the depression.
Especially because you have this cutoff where the very low depression, like that's almost like the worst possible illness, and yet no one's helping, right? And then you assume that the causation goes the other way. If someone broke all of their limbs we would help them, hopefully more than the person who's just broken an arm. I think that's very, very plausible. So yeah, super interesting work, and I really do hope people follow up on it in different societies. And I know quite a few anthropologists who are really interested in studying this sort of stuff. So I'm sure that over the next few years we will be doing more work. So mental health is obviously super important, and especially in the case of perinatal mental health. This is something that our group is looking at, actually, is taking explanations of perinatal depression, so postnatal depression, basically, and talking to mothers who are in a kind of clinical setting or who've been enrolled in psychiatric services, who are highly at risk for perinatal depression, and just giving them an evolutionary explanation and preparing them and saying, hey, if you're about to be a mother, expect yourself to feel down if you're not getting the social support you need. It's very natural. And just talking to these mothers who live in quite deprived situations in the UK about like the expectation, well, the history of having so much social support as a mother, and the kind of expectation, the evolutionary expectation that you would get a lot of social support, telling them, that the depression might be a reaction to lacking that support, and just basically asking them for their perspectives. And I'll have a whole episode on this at some point when we finish the study and get a lot of these. I'd really like to get one of the women in here actually and interview her, but that might happen. But yeah, we've had some really interesting feedback on how it's kind of helped mothers understand themselves a bit more, and also allow them to talk to their partners about getting social support. And there's been some great anecdotes of being brought breakfast in bed by a partner who's never done this before in their life, but just kind of showing them, just showing this social support and kind of worrying. So I really do think that, these explanations do matter, and this research does matter just at this level of creating, a norm around social support. Because in the world where everything is biochemical, then we kind of feel a bit hopeless. Like, well, that's a psychiatrist's job. If you're depressed, like, well, I can't prescribe you a medication. Or if it's genetic, I can't fix your genes. But, changing the narrative to kind of make it clear that this is a sort of natural response, and you have a part to play as a person's personal community. I think it really could have an effect. I don't know how much.
Extremely hopeful. It gives an extremely hopeful perspective, and I would say it's even empowering, because I'm so excited. I really want to. Please do send me as soon as you have a report or a final or an initial paper, with the result. I'm really, really interested, because this would add another weapon in the arsenal that we have, which is a little bit slim, in trying to help women that feel that way. Just saying, listen, this is normal, and it might be because of that, and involving, therefore, in this conversation, the partner, because
Right.
that is really the problem. I don't think if for some women, I'm not saying all the women, I'm not saying for major depression, that could really be a malfunction. Our mechanism has been tuned out a little bit too much. I'm not saying for that we need whatever we need. But for some women, if this is really the reason why they're experiencing that, telling them and helping a discussion, a non-discussion with the partner, maybe marriage therapy rather than individual therapy, maybe it would be more fruitful. Because if the problem is in the relationship, I cannot fix anything by myself. If I take a pill, I'm not saying that we should not give pills. If pills help, by all means, we should do everything, because it feels awful to be depressed. It really feels awful, and we should do everything we can to help people recover and feel good. But what's the point? If the problem is a relationship problem, giving a pill to the person on one end of the relationship seems misguided.
Right, and maybe they do actually just need help at home that won't be provided otherwise, not just for the depression, but for the raising of the child. Maybe they are being, and they're neglected in some minor way just because the mother can't do everything. They just actually can't provide all that support. Yeah, another thing that we're interested in following up on is whether if you give these training sessions, mothers are more likely to seek out like community, like local community, like young mothers groups, which maybe can be a bit daunting, and especially if you're a person with depression, you don't feel like going out, and it's sort of it's weird because the emotion of sort of shutting down and kind of giving up in some sense is exactly what you don't need to do in modern society, where you need to actually go and find a community, because we just lost the immediate community feedback that would always have been there, that if you had shut down, people would always notice. But now you can shut down in your own house and no one will notice, because no one, and the few hours a day you spend outside, or the half an hour to go shopping, like there's no one there to check. So encouraging mothers to seek support, I think, would be another avenue. Do you think about where do you think it sits in like the public health versus psychological individual interventions? I don't know where you think about evolutionary perspectives. Obviously you've thought a lot about female competition as well. I don't know if you think at like the societal level how we can change things and what the implications are, or if the individual level is easier. I don't know. Do you have answers?
Wow, what a question. This is a big question. And I think we haven't even started to scratch the surface of what evolutionary science, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary science, we haven't even started to scratch the surface of what it can do. If we think about psychology, what you are doing is going to be a test of whether this kind of perspective would be extraordinarily powerful. If with that perspective, that kind of intervention would have a positive effect on mental health. In my experiment, in my other experiment, the answer is clear. It's change the system and not the women. With the original hypothesis on women competitiveness and they don't reach the top, we have books. If we still had physical bookstore, now it's only Amazon. If we had physical bookstore, we would have rows and rows of books dedicated to fix women, written by women. Lean in, do this, do that. This self-help manual in the United States, they love self-help manual. It's always trying to improve yourself, to be better, not to do this, not to do that. The 10 rules, the 12 rules. So
affirmations and
yes, and my experiment says no, it's not question that women should behave like men to reach the top. Women can do it in a women's way without doing this kind of violence to themselves, because it's very valuable to do leadership, to do status in a way that it's more congenial to women. It's actually better for society, if you think about less inequalities. But how do you achieve it? By changing a little bit the system. For example, in a company, if you want to apply this evolutionary concept in a company, instead of giving a bonus just to the one person in a division, the leader of the division, and you give individual bonuses, you can say the bonus is for entire division. All of a sudden, you're going to have women that naturally lean in, that naturally apply, because they are not competing for themselves. They are competing for the entire division, and then they share it in the division. So we could have a system, an economic system, a political system, that it is slightly changed. I'm not saying to not to be in a market economy, in a capitalistic economy. We have all seen that a planned economy doesn't work. A planned economy, when you impose equality on the outside, we have seen the kind of society that emerge, and it's definitely not something that we can advocate. But we can. We have an infinity of different system of incentives that we can apply in a society to maintain individual freedom, to still reap the benefit of free trade, to still reap the benefit of exchange. The root core, the market do create values, but we can change the incentives so that the society works for everyone and not just for a type of individual that does things in a particular way. We do create institution, we design institution based on what we value in society, based on the way we do things. And if we open it up a little bit to diversity, maybe we can create even better institution. And evolutionary psychology, I think, gives tons of idea on what we could lever. All the work, another example, because see, then this became a slippery slope. So, but maybe we take all these ideas that we used to have that during a war, during a natural disaster, people become monsters. There is the breakdown in the United States. There are often hurricanes that hits, and now, unfortunately, we've seen also the flood that happens in Europe as well. And there was this idea in economics, and I still think, unfortunately, that it is the prevalent one, that it is the breakdown of the social contracts. People become looters. All hell break loose. But do we have evidence of that? I did for many, many years, and I still do. We send students in post-disaster situation, in post-war situation, and we find the opposite, that people that have been more victimized, people that have witnessed, experienced a disaster, family member who died, property that got destroyed, they become more pro-social right in the aftermath. I'm not saying after maybe 10 years of bitterness because the government didn't help them recover, but right in the aftermath, what we are noticing over and over and over again is that an increase, significant increase on prosociality. And the idea that when we are faced with a disaster, people don't become monsters. People bind together, help each other, because it's inscribed in our mind, in our evolved mind, that for survival we need to cooperate. Cooperation is a competitive strategy. Cooperating with each other, being more pro-social, is the way in which we are going to survive when facing hardship, when facing a disaster, when facing an aggressor. It's very important if the war is from the outside, or of course, if it's an internal war between tribes. But even if it's internal within tribes, there is going to be an increase in prosociality. How does this affect what we do? Take Hurricane Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina came in the United States, the National Guard was sent with the mindset that was not evolutionary sound, this mindset that people would become looters and they would start stealing and robbing and killing each other. The National Guard, look it for yourself, I don't want to say numbers that are extraordinarily high, but all the evidence spot that more than 1,000 people were actually killed by the National Guard because they thought they were criminals, looters, and people taking advantage of a disaster. If you instead, you train your National Guard, your response preparation is people are going to be a resource because they are going to be the one that look out for the neighbor, that know that the neighbor is alone. They are going to be the one that can help you during the aftermath in the recovery. You're going to have a completely different way in which you can prepare your manual to reply to a disaster situation. Having the right behavioral model, that tells you what is the immediate reaction, the psychological reaction. And this is going to probably be something that it is evolutionary sounding. If we talk about this immediate reaction, I don't know if we can call them instinct. I don't know if it's still a word that we could use. I know that there is lots of backlash, at least in economics, calling instinct. But if we have a good behavioral, if we have a good behavioral model that it is rooted in evolutionary psychology, I think we can improve our institution, we can improve society, because we are going to create a system that works in line with how humans evolved to be, rather than according to this Homo economicus model that has never existed.
Yeah, it sort of works.
I've never seen an Homo economicus.
Yeah, it like at the giant a macroeconomic scale where you force businesses to compete, it kind of vaguely predicts stuff. But yeah, I agree. I've actually thought about this a lot in the context of like how to make just a boring 9 to 5 an enjoyable task that people really like get into and feel part of a community. And yeah, just simple things like I was reminded of this when you were talking about giving women the options to share their bonuses. But yeah, just having like an incentive structure within the company, which is more about like something reminiscent of our evolutionary past, like earning points to put towards a feast at the end of like every quarter. You have a feast, and the person who did really well will get like you can see how much they've contributed to this giant party or whatever. And it's just so. Firstly, it's fun, but also it's more like directly related to the history of really hunting big game and coming back and sharing the mammoth. And I feel like people would really enjoy their work much more if it was not just, oh, I'm getting this bonus which is not told to me yet, and everyone kind of hides their own bonus because they don't want to let other people know how much they're getting paid. And so you're forcing people to be against each other in a kind of in a tribal situation or a community situation where you're meant to be fostering this group cohesion. And there should be some simple principles which really can translate in that way. And yeah, you'd expect people would be less depressed about going to work and
Well, think about all these new companies in Silicon Valley. I live in San Francisco, so I'm very familiar with Silicon Valleys and these kids, 20 years old, 24 years old, in a garage, how they make the job. And even large company, the way, before the pandemics, when there wasn't this working from home at Google's, at Google, at Facebook, now these are ginormous company. But before then, and the smaller companies, it was really party. There was lots of partying, lots of communal activity, so much so that people loved going there, even Saturday, even Sunday. They were staying there even after dinner. I don't know if you have seen, it's a TV show about, what's his name, Newman, on WeWork.
Oh, he was a famous party guy, right? Yeah.
Yes. So watch that show. That tells you how to make a 9 to 5 job the most fun things you can possibly do in your life, because he really tapped into the core essence of what motivates people to give it the best. And then, he did it in a way that eventually was not sustainable, and definitely he made a lot of money for themselves doing that. But it's he tapped into something very important, that communal, that he tapped into the need of being part of a community.
Right. Yeah, and just some basic principles can really improve your life if you were to kind of create it at the communal level. But I think I agree, it needs to be coming from somewhat top down, but not really top, just management or whoever's running the company. Maybe we don't need public health. That's a whole messy thing to try and talk about. But maybe it's easier to convince companies to create more hospitable environments for humans who are, not just chasing the higher salary. Yes, interesting.
And we know that money does not motivate. It's not only money that motivates people. We know it. We absolutely know it. Tons of experiments shows that, money are important and until survival, a roof on your head and food, fundamental. But after that, we're not even sure they bring this level of happiness. Although,
in comparison to
multi-billionaire seems to be leading a lovely life with yacht on the Mediterranean Sea 6 months a year. I'd like that.
But are they really happy? I don't know. Jeff Bezos is the one who's really living like that. But I think that the drive is, I don't know.
It's not just money. It's power. Yeah. I think the power trip. I think the idea of having power, of your voice, your tweet. I don't know, how do you say, your ex? I don't know what's the name called anymore.
It was a poorly thought out name change.
It's a funny, but the idea that your tweet can really have an effect in the world, not just in your small community in the world. Can you imagine the power trip that one might get?
Yeah. Anyway, super interesting. And if there's any mothers or planning to be mothers listening to this, I'm sure they'll take some, insight and hopefully feel happier about reaching out. And hopefully we can change our institutions and just the conversation about postnatal depression to not make it this kind of scary thing that needs to be diagnosed by a psychiatrist and shut away, but actually something that we should just think about helping with. It seems very direct. It's one of all of the evolutionary explanations for a mental disorder, it's the one where there's this very clear social intervention that we can do as friends, as family members, as partners. And so, I'm optimistic that it'll be one of the soonest that we can actually make an impact in. Is there anything else that you think is important to say to people who are interested in evolution and mental health, or evolutionary psychology, or evolutionary psychiatry? Is there anything that you'd want to kind of cover?
If anyone is interested, let's collect more data. It would be, I think, to make this because it's so important. And the solution could be, I'm not saying simple, because it's not simple. How do you engineer social network? How do you engineer help? You cannot, let's say your husband is cheating. There is, sometimes you can do something, sometimes not. I was watching the TV series My Brilliant Friend, based on the Elena Ferrante movie. Fantastic. And at some point, she is the one cheating. And that kind of, they didn't need to go to family therapy for a while, because that was the mothers of her started beating her up, the Italian version of the I would not advocate that at all. Yes. But when the family, the mother and the mother-in-law, they can do something taking care of the young couple that find themselves out. So what I wanted to say is that we cannot do that. But if we get strong data that really social support is not just necessary for not falling into the depression, it's much better to prevent it. So ideally, as soon as, but in general, you don't need to be pregnant, you don't need to be a woman. We should really teach people that social support is the most important things in life. To always reach out to your friends, to have girlfriend, to have boyfriend, to have friends of any kind. And it's not just that telephone call or being friend on Facebook. You need to be physically doing things together. So this is going to be the most protective things. But finding evidence that when people are feeling down, say, look, there is tons of evidence, not just from Uganda, but from the UK, from Italy, that when you're feeling down, if you make the effort to reach out, if you make the effort to talk, people will respond positively. So destigmatizing, for a long period of time, there has been stigma around a mother or people in general that feel depressed. So removing the stigma, let's be open, let's talk about it. Maybe this is what we can do as a society, cutting down on the stigma so that people feel comfortable about talking, and then let the magic happen, because we know that people want to help. If I know that my girlfriend is depressed, I naturally want to help. I don't need an intervention of a therapist that tells me, it would be helpful if you would help her. We know that people do it because this is what we have baked in. But only if I find out that she's depressed. She has to be able to tell me. Right. And another thing, so going back to, there is so much, going back to something at the beginning about especially the spouse responding positively. I remember reading some paper in which they did a crazy experiments when they made men sniff out women tears. I don't know if you're familiar with this experiment. So they made lots
of women. Life, yes.
They made lots of women cry, and they put in the vial. I don't know how they cried, but they were able to collect all these tears, and then they put these tears into. They saved the tears, and then they used saline solution. You know, the one for the contact lens for the eyes, and then they brought in a bunch of men to run the to do the experiment. And they made the men sniff the tears and the saline solution. and they measure men testosterone. Men sniffing women's tear, immediately testosterone went down. That tells you the reaction, and that's why I say there is something about the pair bond. There is something about these strategies. Women might have evolved this adaptation to get this extra help, especially from men, especially from the father of the baby. And men cannot help it because they enough that they sniff women tears, they see the sign of the breast, the testosterone go down. So I want to see that replicated, but this was in a big journal. It was not like in an obscure predatory journal. No. This was a vetted experiment. It might already have been replicated, and it was like, wow, we cannot help. Maybe that's why men hate so much when women cry on the place of job. When women start to cry, the men hate it. Exactly.
We're trying to compete here, for God's sake.
Exactly. It's our superpower. We know how to lower men competitiveness in a biological way. So it's interesting. It's not so. It's really baked in. It's really baked in.
Yeah.
Superpower.
If it replicates, but yeah, I hope. Yeah, it's. I mean, there is something very emotional. Well, we've just seen people cry. Men are much more empathetic than our primary relatives, especially towards our partners. Right? We are soppy. I'm sure that most women who've been in a relationship with a man realize there is like a soft interior that is below the gruff, testosterone-fueled, competitive nature that they put on with their bros. Yeah, you can melt the heart. It's fair. Interesting.
Yeah, and it doesn't work men. It doesn't work on men tears. It's female tears.
Oh. Yeah, we don't care about them. No. Yeah, cool. Okay, wow, fascinating. I just want to mirror what you've said about more people doing this research. I think it's so important, and we will be able to move psychiatry slowly and just the perspective of mental health and public health, hopefully, towards the paradigm which is most based in biological theory and really does deeply explain what's going on here, and we can relieve human suffering eventually, little bit by little bit, with that better understanding.
That's the goal.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely, and cool science on the way. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Adam. I really enjoyed it. And one last thing, also the value of different discipline, of collaboration with different discipline, having economists, evolutionary psychologists, biologists, evolutionary biologists, primatologists. All these ideas, they need to get outside each one single silos, because it's through this larger collaboration, each one can contribute what they know how to do and provide a piece of a puzzle, because the puzzle is one. We are working on the same puzzle. And I found if some, especially young researcher, student, don't stay within your discipline, but look broadly, because chances are you're going to learn a lot if you're an economist, you're going to learn a lot by reading evolutionary psychologists, by reading what psychologists have been doing, anthropologists and this stuff. And I'm sure is reciprocal, and I'm sure is likewise going
absolutely
the other direction.
Yeah, 100%. That is the future. It's very hard to do because of the structures. We're in different departments and stuff, but having
but
shared
something
conferences
like your
and
podcast,
yes. Well, yeah,
it's difficult because
yes.
but a podcast, writing a book, or doing this thing, because I know I don't have the time to crack open the journals in another discipline. I can barely keep up in my own discipline. But podcasts are so much fun, and articles and books. So we can do it. Thank you to the new technology.
It's amazing. Yeah, I think the field of evolutionary psychiatry and evolutionary mental health is really growing a lot in the last 5 years. And most of it is down to the internet. I've met a lot of people who've just been scattered around the world, and we just we weren't physically able to meet up. And actually, weirdly, COVID was kind of a big thing because people were more willing to jump on Zoom and just connect. And so I think that, the long-term effects of bringing, encouraging people to just have discussions across thousands of miles, across
So the
time
COVID
zones.
effect, with COVID and working from home, there were no more seminars in my university. And I started to join online every Wednesday the seminars at UC Santa Barbara, Nida Cosmides and June Tubi. And this has been my initiation really to evolutionary psychology directly from them. I would have never had this opportunity if there were no working from home reaction to COVID, because they would have done their own seminars miles and miles away from San Francisco. I would have never met them.
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, there's a few people in Cambridge, but not that many. And it's great to be able to talk to you in San Francisco from here. So, yes, amazing. Hopeful optimism. We'll solve it all and we'll collaborate and we will fix everything, I'm sure, slowly but surely.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy the episode.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye.